together with Dr. Jean-Michel Salese, we are actually the co-advisor of Anurag Mangla's PhD. And so welcome to this final step in the process of getting a PhD here in EPFL. It's probably useful to remember that at EPFL, this is a two-step process, and this constitutes the last, the public defense constitutes the last step in this process. Before going to the public defense, there was an exam that Anurag handled very brilliantly. And this was, so this is a closed door exam, and this was with the jury of the thesis. So Professor Gamis from University of, which one is Granada. Yeah, I always confuse Sevilla and Granada, but he's from University of Granada. Professor Iniguez from University of Tarragona, and Professor Ionescu from EPFL. And this exam was chaired by Dr. Boero from the EPFL. So that happened in August 25th, and so now Anurag can proceed with doing the public defense. So in this public defense, he will present his work. It's also the opportunity for you to learn about what he has done. It's also the last opportunity to comment, and if you have things against it, it's your last time. Once we're done with it, this means that we all agree on what he has presented and all the results. So we're going to start with a presentation from Anurag. It'll take about 45 minutes. Then Jean-Michel and me will say a few words about the candidate. And maybe then the candidate will say a few words, and then we'll close this session. All right, so Anurag, the word is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Once a girl asked me, what do I do? What is it that I do for my PhD? I told her I do modeling of transistors. She was very happy, and she said, that's why they look so beautiful these days. This is what she was thinking that I do, whereas what I had in mind is this. And I was looking at your faces like I was standing there and Professor Enz was detailing about my thesis work, and I saw your faces and you were looking at this title, and I saw quizzical faces. So what is it that you do? So I'll try to explain what did I do during my thesis. So for that purpose, I'll ask you to forget, to keep it short and simple, I'll ask you to forget a circuit design perspective, that part. And we'll start by looking at the rest of the title, word by word. Let's start with the word transistors. So what is a transistor? You may think of a transistor as a switch that you find in your houses or on the walls here. It's a similar thing. The only difference being, you do not have to push it with your hands to switch it on and off. It can be switched electronically, it can be switched with electrical signals itself. But most importantly, it can be switched 1 million to 1 billion times per second, which is not at all possible with the switches that we find on our walls. Another interesting thing about the transistors is that we can actually control how much electric current passes through the transistor. So in that sense, we can even think of a transistor as a faucet that we find in our kitchen sinks, where we can actually control how much water passes through the faucet. This is somewhat similar function that a transistor does as well. But what is most important with the transistor, that it can be shrunk to really very small sizes. So imagine at the current technology, if I pluck out my hair, across its width, I can put 4,000 of such transistors, or put it on a different scale. If we could scale each transistor, we can think of each transistor as a person, as people on this earth. The whole population of India can fit inside the Swiss Tech Convention Center. This is what we are talking about, the current technology of transistors. So imagine you have more than the population of India sitting right inside your pockets in the form of your smartphones. So this is a transistor. Now, what is the next word about? MOS. MOS is one of the reasons that allows the transistor to scale down to such small sizes. So transistor is made out of a solid semiconductor. So it's a semiconductor crystal. It's a solid, just like this, these tables are. It's a solid. So if we'll look at the transistor under a microscope, we'll see such kind of a structure, where this is a semiconductor crystal. We can simplify all this diagram, all this structure of the transistor in a simplified diagram like this, where the source channel and the drain are all semiconductor solid material. Then there is an oxide layer over which we have a gate, which is usually metal in the current technologies. And this is what gives the name metal oxide semiconductor, the MOS. Now you can think of this transistor structure. I talked about the faucet, the analogy between the transistor and the robinet, the faucet in the kitchen. This is something similar. You can think of the source as where the water enters. This is where it's like the body of the faucet, and this is where the water goes out. This part gate is what is similar to the faucet's control, by which we control how much water is flowing out. Only that, instead of water, we have electrons, which enter from the source, move through the channel, and exit through the drain. And electrical signals again at the gate, which control how many electrons pass through this channel. For my thesis, I studied a little different kind of a transistor, which is called the double gate transistor. So what happens, we introduce another gate in this transistor on two sides, so that we can control much better as to how many electrons pass through this channel, so we can control the electricity or the electric current through this transistor much better. Now, what happens inside the transistor? This is what I was primarily focused for a major part of the thesis. I was primarily focused on what is going on inside the transistor. So if we have a look at the simplistic picture here, what happens is the electrons enter, as I just mentioned, from the source. They enter into the channel of the transistor and they go out of the drain. But meanwhile, what they do, they scatter a lot. Why do they scatter? There are so many electrons which are entering into the channel. So they collide amongst themselves. They collide with the atoms of the semiconductor crystal I just mentioned about. Don't forget, it's a solid here, so electrons are colliding and scattering with the atoms there. Then while manufacturing, we also introduce some kind of defects on the interfaces when we manufacture the transistors. So there are material defects which cause the collision or the scattering of these electrons. So this is what normally, typically, the transport of electrons would look like if we could see it some way, although we cannot. So it is a schematic, it's a picture that we can think of. We cannot really see it, but this is what it would look like. But I just mentioned, we have been downscaling the transistors. We have been shrinking them really at a very high speed, such that the transistors have scaled from greater than 100 nanometers of length in the year 2000, and they will be scaling down to less than 10 nanometers by a few years. So what does it imply? The question that I had to ask during this thesis as well is like, will the transistor, what changes inside the transistor when we downscale the transistor to such small sizes that they will be below 10 nanometers? Is it something that changes? Which is what brings us to the next words, the next set of words in the title of my thesis, which is nanoscale quasi-ballistic. So nanoscale, I have already tried to explain. Nanoscale is the size, it's the dimension to which we can shrink the transistors, such that it's at the atomic scale. It's really, really so small that we could actually put in 4,000 of such transistors in a single strand of hair, across the width of a single strand of hair. Now, classically, I mentioned that transistors are quite long in size. And I also mentioned that the electrons, they undergo lots of scattering and collisions inside the channel. What I forgot to mention is that there is when the electrons undergo these collisions, there is an average length. So once the electron enters, there is an average length, what we call the mean free path, represented by lambda on this diagram, before which they do not collide. So when electron enters, it travels a little bit on an average, a length of lambda, and then it undergoes scattering. So then, if the transistor is so long that the length of the transistor is many mean free paths, we understand the electrons will enter, they will scatter, they will collide many times, and then they will exit. The other end of the spectrum, is such that we can shrink the transistor to such a dimension that its length is so much smaller than this mean free path, in such a way that the electron enters from the source, and even before it would collide with anything, it has already exited out of the drain. This is what is called the ballistic transport. I know the word ballistic always brings into mind people's mind war and missiles and rockets. It's somewhat similar. The reason that those missiles are called ballistic is also the same, because once we have launched them, there is no external influence on those missiles. Once they have been launched from the source, they reach the drain, they reach the target. It's the same with the electrons. Once they have been launched from the source, they reach the drain without any collisions, without any influence amongst the electrons or with the crystal atom. This is what is called ballistic. Now you see there's a gap between this and this spectrum, which is what we call quasi-ballistic. And why is that? It's because in such kind of transistors, the length is such that it's neither way too long, that it's not way too longer than mean free path, nor is it too short. It's not very small so that the electrons do not collide at all, they do not scatter at all. So there are a few which enter, they undergo scattering, and there are others which enter and go straight away. So it's a mix and match between, it's a mixture of different kinds of electron behavior, carrier behavior. That is why we call such transistors as quasi-ballistic. For those of you who understand semiconductor physics, they will appreciate the fact that the quasi-Fermi energy, the quasi-Fermi level is a very important concept in understanding and modeling the behavior of semiconductor devices. What is the difference? And please excuse me, this here is a little bit technical for those of you who do not understand semiconductor physics. But what happens, what changes with ballistic transport is that the transport in the ballistic devices is completely out of equilibrium. It's the collisions inside the diffusive devices which tend to bring the whole system towards an equilibrium, which is missing. The collisions are missing in the ballistic devices. So the device can never be in equilibrium. The transport is completely out of equilibrium. This is what we see. We see these two plots here. We can compare these two plots. Here what I'm plotting is the number of carriers as a function of carrier energy. So in a diffusive device, we will have a very nice Maxwellian curve like this, or a Gaussian curve like this, where the carrier energies are distributed as they would be in any equilibrium system. On the other hand, in a completely ballistic device, what we would see is that we will only have very high energy peaks like this. So the carriers would have very, very high energies, but we will not be able to have a shape like this, which will give us an equilibrium representation of the system. Again, in the middle of the spectrum, we have this picture. This is what represents the quasi-ballistic transport, where we have a combination of ballistic carriers, very high energy carriers here, as well as some carriers which are in equilibrium, so diffusive carriers like these. And this is what complicates the problem. In such system, in such a transistor, either in ballistic and quasi-ballistic transistors, we cannot define local Fermi energy. And since we cannot define a local Fermi level, we cannot use the classical ways of understanding, of modeling such kind of devices. Which is what brings me to the next word on the title, which is modeling. Quick quiz. Out of all these definitions that I could find in the Oxford Dictionary for modeling, or a model, what do you think is it that I've been working with?
Second one.
Good response, another one.
Number 4.
Unfortunately, both of you are wrong. I work with the third definition, which is a simplified description, especially a mathematical one, to assist calculations and predictions. So again, what it looks like is neither this nor that. Although I tried to look like that once, but I failed miserably. So what it looks like is like this. Now the problem, as I mentioned, so coming back to the topic, the problem that I mentioned in modeling is that all the semiconductor theory, the theory of transistors that has been built on since the invention of the transistor in 1947, has been built on the concept that, on the assumption that the transport is an equilibrium transport. So we can define the local quasi-Fermi levels, and then we can use what is called the drift diffusion equation to model such transistors. The transistors, on the other hand, have been scaling very, very fast, as I just showed, or as this slide shows you, that from in 1970s, from transistors which were about 10 microns in size, we are going rapidly down to 22 nanometers today, and less than 10 nanometers in a couple of, or in maybe 4 years' time. The problem is that models, the people like me who work, are either lazy or are not intelligent enough. The models find it hard enough to catch up with the technology advancement which goes this rapidly. So the transistors have really scaled from greater than 100 nanometers a few years back to less than 10 nanometers they would be in a couple of years' time. The transport I just mentioned, for such kind of devices, the transport has been diffusive transport. Remember, diffusive is when there are a lot of scattering, lots of collisions going on. Ballistic is when there is no scattering, the electrons enter and they leave out. Quasi-ballistic transport is somewhat in between. Now, the models for diffusive devices were developed, as I just mentioned, since the invention of the transistor. They have been what is called the drift diffusion theory, the drift diffusion model. We have been able to model them. But some people were intelligent enough, they could foresee that we will have ballistic transport appearing in devices very soon, and they started working on such kind of models. And we already also have the model for ballistic devices, which is what is the most common model used today is called the virtual source model. The problem lies in the middle again. Even though everything is continuous, everything is scaling, we have a gap in the models. We have what is the modeling gap. And this is what was the goal of the thesis, is to try to fill in this gap in a scalable manner, so that we can make a model we can use the same model and gives us the same results as what the drift diffusion model does, and for long devices, and what the virtual source model does for the short devices. Now let me come to how people have started doing the ballistic models. Because this is what was an idea at the beginning. What I thought is, maybe we can start with the model for nanoscale devices, because this is where we are going. The virtual source model is a model for short devices, for ballistic transistors. Can we modify this model? Can we extend it some way to go back so that we can use it in a scalable manner for the transistors, long channel transistors, keeping in all the benefits that the model brings for the short channel, the nanoscale transistors. So let me explain just a little bit what the virtual source model is before I go further. So the virtual source model normally assumes the potential profile. So what this blue curve that I'm showing is what is called the electrostatic potential. It's a profile of the electrostatic potential inside, from the source to the drain and the channel. So it's a potential profile of inside the transistor. What the virtual source model says is that this profile looks like a parabola, and we have a little bump in this profile near the source, which is what is called the virtual source, because we can represent all the electric current, what is called the flux in this theory, by 3 different kinds of fluxes. One, which is injected from the source, One, which is injected by the drain and reaches the source. And the third one, which would be if there was some scattering inside the device, and let's say that it's still the device which has scattering, would scatter and come back. So ultimately, we can write the current inside the device, or the net flux inside the device, by just summing up all these kinds of fluxes on this point here. That is why it functions like what is a virtual source. We can ultimately write everything from this point forward. So it's the virtual source. I won't go into the details of how this equation is derived and what all these terms mean here, but just for your information, just maybe to sound a little bit impressive, this is what the equation looks like. What's the problem with this model? Now, why did I need to work on this model in this thesis? The first problem in this model, as I just mentioned, is that it's not scalable. Look at this equation. This equation is what is the drift diffusion model. And you would agree with me that this equation does not resemble at all to the equation that I just showed you on the previous slide. Again, not going into the details, you'll have to accept it that indeed it does not look like the same. The second problem is that in this model, people have considered everything. The whole theory is built around the little point, what is called the virtual source here. No one considers what the gate, remember, this is the thing that I told you, which controls everything that goes on inside the channel. So it's like the control of the robinet, of the faucet. It's like that. And this theory does not really consider what happens, what does the gate do across all this length. The only thing it considers is what the gate does at this point. I would have been very satisfied with that, but Jean-Michel is never satisfied. So, this is where also the problem comes when I was talking about the quasi-Fermi level. This is where this becomes important. See that the quasi-Fermi level, we cannot define a quasi-Fermi level. If we could have defined, as we can do for the drift diffusion model, we would have been able to write an equation so simply, and we can define what the gate is doing, how it is controlling the charges and potentials at every point in this channel, which this theory does not allow us to do. And here is another important point which I discovered. This is possibly the most important point that thing that we discovered during this thesis. I had an idea. Okay, people are saying that the profiles in nanostate transistors, they look like parabolic. What if we compare? Let's do some simulations. So this is where we asked our partners at University of Granada to do some simulations, device level simulations for us, and switch on and switch off the scattering, which we can do in simulators. That's a software which we can do, and compare what happens. Do the devices look the same? What we find out is that if the device is very short, like 10 nanometers, whether there is scattering or there is no scattering inside the device, the profiles look very similar. The profiles look parabolic. Then I had another idea. Okay, so that it seems like then ballistic transport is not having any effect. The scattering or switching off of scattering is having no effect inside the device. So then we are maybe not achieving anything with the ballistic transport. What if? Is it that the people are thinking it wrong, or is it that really ballistic transport is not having any effect? If we take a long device, and since we can, why don't we switch off the scattering in such a long device? And then see what happens. Once there was scattering inside the device, we see again that the potential profile was parabolic, as was normally expected. But what was not expected was this. If we switch off the scattering in the device, the potential profile is no more parabolic. The device is long. No one had considered this before, that there could be long devices, but they could be ballistic. And so what is the effect of ballisticity in a long device? This is what we discovered, and this was the most surprising thing. When I had asked around, I asked everyone, the experts in the field, the few experts I talked to, no one had expected such a profile before. So what this led me to conclude is that then the parabolic profiles which the model, the virtual source model, the existing model for ballistic and quasi-ballistic devices is assuming is not due to ballisticity, is not due to ballistic transport, is simply because of the short channel of the device. So we have not really understood, or the people who have developed this model have not really tried to take into account the pure ballistic nature. They have mixed the effects of ballisticity and the effect of the device being short. Now this is where I started thinking about, so then if we have to model in a scalable manner the devices, so I have to consider such long devices, because such long devices would definitely be diffusive and will have a profile like this. People can do this, but no one has been able to model this. So what if I can model this and then use the same model in such a way that it can model this behavior as well as this behavior? This is where I needed to start. So what I did, instead of looking at the potential profiles, I had to look also at the charge profiles. So the charge is the electrons that I'm talking about, the electrons which entered, which is the equivalent of water in the robinet. So instead of water, we're talking about electricity, so we have electrons. This is the profile of those electrons inside the channel. What I discovered is that in a ballistic device, the device which does not have any scattering, the charge density is lesser than it would be in the same device if there was a diffusion like as usual. So this is where I made a hypothesis that we can, in fact, model such a device in a scalable manner by taking a constant profile. As you can see, the ballistic charge is pretty much constant throughout the channel. So a constant charge density, profile density for the representing the ballistic charges, combine it with a kind of parabolic profile which represents the diffuser charges, the rest of the charges which are not ballistic, sum them up so that we can have a model, a continuous model, which can, with the help of a parameter, model the two devices, the diffusive and the ballistic devices, just using the same equation. So these are what the equations look like. Don't worry about it, I'm not going to take any exam at the end, but this is just to show you what took time took almost 3 years to come up with these equations. And this is the parameter that I'm talking about. This parameter as what represents the ratio of the charges that I was talking about, that the charge in the ballistic device is less than the diffusive device. This is what the parameter that I introduced. And then these equations which use these parameters, using different values of the parameters, we can continuously model the two devices. Now, this is where I show the results. So you see that here I'm showing short devices on this row, so 10 nanometer devices. Using the same model, I have successfully modeled at different voltages, so different conditions. We can put different voltages on the same device. The same model can give me accurate results, can match the Monte Carlo simulations very well just by the change of the parameter. So I can model the devices at different voltages, and I can also model the device if there is scattering or there is no scattering, the same model works. The same goes for longer channel devices, and this is where I had started, in fact, and this is what I would now say is the success of this model, that it can also model longer channel devices even if they are ballistic. We just need to change the value of one parameter. Then I extended this model so that it can model not only, as we see in this curves, the regions in the middle of the devices, but actually everything from the source to the drain. So I could extend this model a bit later so that it can model pretty accurately everything, all the charge profiles from the source to the drain in a continuous manner. This is what I show for the very short devices, the 10 nanometer ones. And here we can see that it works the same just by changing a parameter for even the longer channel devices. Now we come back to the potential profiles where we had started, which is what had startled us in the beginning. And you see again that the same model now we can, using the potential equation of the model, we can model ballistic 10 nanometer and 100 nanometer devices, as well as diffusive 10 nanometers and 100 nanometer devices pretty accurately. You see here, this device, the long device, we can model using the same equation, both the parabolic form as well as the form which had surprised us in the beginning, these kind of a flat form, we can model that as well. I know. I saw blank faces. Unfortunately, it has to be done that way. And you were wondering the same thing, yeah? So what? So I mentioned about the transistors which are sitting inside your pockets, the chips, the microchips that are sitting inside your pockets, and this laptop, they are all around us. But how do those microchips get to be? The process is a bit complicated. A microchip starts at this level, circuit design, then it goes down to physical design and fabrication. So I've really simplified the whole process of making a microchip. But what we are targeting here is the circuit design. This is where the designers who want what the microchip will do at the end, what kind of functions will it have at the end. They think of electronic circuits. They have to design these circuits, and then they have to know that these circuits would actually behave the same way as they conceive in their mind. If they want a circuit that should display a video on the screen like this, they should know that this would behave the same way before they can actually go to manufacture that. Because manufacturing and then realizing it's not working would be too expensive. So for that is what we use, it's called simulator. A simulator is a software in which a circuit designer designs a circuit like this using symbols and everything, and then tries to see the results if what he was expecting out of the circuit, it's behaving that way or not, or he has to go back and redesign. So what constitutes a simulator? A simulator has lots of algorithms, but apart from that, you see these little symbols. How does the simulator know what is this little symbol, what the little symbol is? How does it behave? How does it know that with this drawing, it has to create a graph like this? This is where the models come in. So the models are nothing but the physical description, the kind of equations that I showed you. More elaborate equations representing the whole physical behavior of all these little symbols here. So the symbol, just for your information, is the transistor. And this is where my work comes in. I won't say that I have really made a model which would just go directly into the simulator and the circuit designer would be coming and kissing me and saying, you simplified my job. No, it won't be the case at the moment. The work in the thesis was just a very little part of what would be a complete model that would need to go inside the circuit simulator to design a circuit that would be able to make the latest iPhone for you. So now we agree that we have understood all of these words in the title. I thought that as well. So I went to Professor Enns and had this conversation with him. But he wasn't satisfied. So I had to do all this lot of work as well. And I've presented you only this. Then he agreed that, okay, now it's enough, and that's when he allowed me to go and take the exam, which he mentioned about earlier. I'll let you read the results, and I'll wait for your questions.
Thank you, Anurag. Any questions or comments? Question here.
No.
So in the back there, yeah.
In your model, you said that you have a parameter which you have to adjust according to for different lengths or for different situations. So is this parameter, to define this parameter, you have to do the experiments, or you can do it computationally as well?
So if I understand your question, it's like you tell me if you're asking me if the parameter, how do I determine the value of the parameter? Is it like I'm just making experiments and then seeing is it fitting or not? Well, first of all, the parameter is actually quite a physical one. So now this is what the parameter I call is the ballisticity parameter. As I mentioned, it's the ratio between the device, between the charge densities. Now, indeed, the parameter corresponds to physical quantities as we see, but to determine its value, yes, we have not been able to model the parameter as of yet. I cannot give you an equation of the parameter that this is how, depending on the voltages, it would depend. I know that this parameter's value is equal to 1 by definition when the device is ballistic. So when there is no scattering in the device, it's equal to 1. And all the values for devices with scattering will be less than that. So the value of the parameter, it's not strictly not equal to 0, so greater than 0 and up to equal to 1. But for different bias conditions, I have to determine it experimentally, calibrating it with the Monte Carlo simulations.
Okay, any other comments or questions? So maybe you can also mention how is this going to be used in compact models, or how far are we from that?
So indeed, now first of all, when we mention about compact models, so the compact model is something that is what I mentioned about would actually go inside a simulator. So why is it called a compact model? First of all, is because the real world is very complex. Talking about devices at really nanometer scales. So we need really very, very complex equations, talk about Schrodinger's equation, these kind of things, which are computationally very intensive. We normally need supercomputers, very high power computers to do such simulations if we have to include all the physics. So a compact model is what is in a flavor that I showed here. We try to simplify that model in a way that we can use inside a simulation program, which can do the simulations and give us results much faster, which is computationally less expensive. Now, this work is not yet a compact model. It is a part of a compact model. It's actually the beginning of a compact model. We needed to understand the physics and then translate into a compact form the kind of equations that I showed you. Believe me or not, even though those equations, the slide with the equations that I showed you, might look very complicated, but they are really, really the most simple, very simple equations that we can do. So we have the equation for the charge as well as the equation for the potential. For even for the basic compact model, we need to have an equation for the current. This is what I could not yet finish during this thesis, but I have postulated some ideas for this thesis by which we can have a full current IV model is what we call it, compact model. But then there would be, for a full compact model, there need to be many other physical effects that would need to be taken care of, which has not been done yet.
We're looking for other candidates to pursue this work, right? So if anyone is interested, any other questions or remarks?
So I'm sorry for coming late and then asking a question. So probably just a little point I missed. What are the points in the graphs experimental data?
Those are from Monte Carlo simulations, in fact.
Okay.
So because, again, we're talking about nanometer devices, so we cannot really measure those devices. First of all, we cannot really see the charge profiles and the potential profiles even by measuring the device. What we can measure are the IV characteristics.
Not even for the 100 nanometers one.
No, really, because at the moment I don't understand. Maybe there is a way, but currently I don't understand myself if there is a way to really see the charge profile inside the device using measurements. And then we should not forget that the dimensions that we are talking about, at such dimensions, transistors, the MOSFETs, the measurements are complicated by many other things. What I'm showing is the intrinsic part of the transistor, really the channel. But then there are lots of other things outside. There is the source, drain, there are lots of parasitics. that would actually, even if we'll do measurements, would shadow everything what the intrinsic part is doing. So the best way now forward here, also why? Because I did some kind of experiments as I showed you. In a 100 nanometer device, a real device would never be ballistic at the moment. A real silicon device at room temperature would not be ballistic. This is where the simulations could help us, because I could actually ask for the scattering to be turned off and see what if this device was ballistic. This is what gave us the lead into how to model it in a continuous manner as well. So to be short, these are Monte Carlo simulations.
Mhm.
Any other question? Okay, so if not, maybe I can say a few words about Anurag. I'll just take the pointer here. So, you know, a PhD thesis is actually like the transport of carriers in a channel of a MOS transistor. There is a lot of unexpected events, scattering events, actually, which make the progress sometimes quite difficult, actually much more difficult than thought initially. And we have been working with Jean-Michel, the co-advisor of this PhD, and other colleagues for a long time in this field of modeling, the semiconductor device modeling, compact models, and with this perspective of using the model for circuit design. So not really just having a nice model and then, but really in the perspective of the designer, how to use the model and take advantage of the model to optimize different circuits and really push them to their limits. So when we started with the work with Anurag, we thought it would be a ballistic PhD. And we were already thinking about how to extend the PhD work by adding, some new challenges. And very quickly we realized that the PhD work would be more quasi-ballistic than actually ballistic. It finally turned out that Anurag's PhD work was more diffusive. Anurag had to face actually many difficulties and challenging problems that he explained, and actually, as mentioned, he only explained a few of them, and many of them were actually not expected initially. So, when Anurag started at the source of his PhD, he quickly reached the virtual source, actually without too much scattering. And he did actually most of this work fairly straightforward at the beginning of his thesis. It's not exactly in the time scale, but more or less roughly along this line. So, we thought it would be straightforward to reach the drain and ballistically. But it turned out when we so the initial goal was actually to extend our EKV model that only includes diffusive model, to extend it to include ballistic transport. And we had some bright ideas at that time, very simple ideas how to model this ballisticity and combine it together with existing diffusive model, with the MOS transistor model. And this is actually the last part, if I'm not wrong, that we started with. It was very intuitive, a very intuitive idea. But very quickly we also realized that how can we verify that? How can we verify? We're not able to measure it. It's very difficult to measure, to distinguish the ballistic transport from the classical diffusive transport. So the only way to really evaluate our model was to go with Monte Carlo simulation. So then, as I said, we started first with modeling the short channel effects, such as velocity saturation, and extended it to regions of moderate and weak evolution. That's more this part over here. And that was already an interesting achievement by itself, because it highlighted all the effects of velocity saturation, even in moderate inversion, that can directly be used to optimize circuits like the simple circuit he showed earlier, accounting for these effects. Now, after reaching the virtual source along the PhD journey, things started to become much more difficult, and Anurag was subject to a lot of backscattering, to the point where he even wanted to go back to the source, giving up the PhD. And thanks to his tenacity and the wise advices of the Lord of the semiconductor, he decided to combat the enemy and advance slowly towards the Holy Grail. And with the help also of Lord Professor Gamis, which is actually the Lord of Monte Carlo simulations, Anurag was then able to progress. And then it was really a teamwork between the team of Professor Gamis, providing actually those simulation results that helped us to progress. And actually we gave them also some feedback, because some of the data they gave us, we simply didn't really understand them. And we actually pointed out some limitation of their own software, where still today, I think it will be very difficult to simulate the region where we are interested, where more in this weak inversion, the combination of weak inversion, low current density and ballisticity. And this is still an open question today. We don't really have the answer today. So, I don't want to be too diffusive, so let's move on. And so after about 3.5 years, probably even a bit more, Anurag finally reached the drain. So welcome and congratulations for reaching this holy drain. Jean-Michel, you want to add a few words?
Very few words, because you already said many very true things about how the things work. I can just maybe emphasize a little bit more on how difficult it was indeed, not only for Anurag, but for all of us to understand what is a ballistic transistor and how we have to model it. And indeed, in the first times, we were very confident, because nothing is more simple than a ballistic device, intuitively. And little by little, we noticed that people were not modeling correctly the device, just because, as Anurag explained, they were missing the electrostatics, which is just the key to have all the plots that you have seen. And so I think that indeed what you did was really impressive in terms of results, and still keeping a high level of simplicity in an apparently simple device, which is much more complex than all what is existing today in terms of fusing devices. So I think that indeed what you have seen is just a very reduced part of the efforts that I'm making. So,
okay, so now is the. You want to add a few words, or? Okay, so I'll ask Jean-Michel to come over, and this is the important, the most important part of this. So maybe I'll read what is written here. So this is the diploma, right? It's in French, so I'll read it in French. L'École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, sur proposition de la Faculté des Sciences et Techniques de l'Ingénieur, décerne à Monsieur Anurag Mangla le grade de docteur ès-sciences. Le candidat a prouvé son aptitude à la recherche scientifique en présentant la thèse intitulée Modeling Nanoscale Quasi-Ballistic MOS Transistors, a circuit design perspective et a réussi l'examen oral exigé par l'ordonnance sur le doctorat dans le cadre du programme doctoral microsystèmes et microélectronique dont il a suivi les cours avec succès et délivré à Lausanne, Suisse, le 12 novembre 2014. C'est signé par notre président, Patrick Bécher, le vice-président pour les affaires académiques, Philippe Gillet, et les directeurs de thèse, Jean-Michel Salez et moi-même. Voilà. Alors,
First of all, thank you, Professor Jean-Michel, for so very beautifully talking about the journey that I took in the last four and a half years. As much as I would like to believe that I was the only one who was working on this thing, that I did it all alone, it would be very, very far from truth. The first person indeed has to be Professor Enns, who I have to thank for all this work. I think no one else could have put it beautifully, and I think once you were speaking, you could have already realized why I was so lucky to have been working with him and his group as a PhD student with him. He had not only been helping me technically with my work, but had been motivating. I know him ever since my master days. I arrived at EPFL 6 years back as a master student. I've been interacting with him ever since, and it has been an honor and a pleasure to have been working with you, sir, all these years. He calls me many times the champion de l'éthique, champion de mathématiques, champion de math cat. All of this I have learned from him. So thank you also for that. Jean-Michel Salez, I used to call him sir as well before, but he would not let me, so I would call him by his name, Jean-Michel Salez.
Lord.
I call him my own Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think that explains why, because the way he spoke, I think you would have understood it as well, but I really realized, again, he is a person who I've interacted also for the last 6 years. He was a teacher for a modeling course, which was possibly maybe a good or a bad influence, that I ended up doing a PhD in modeling. And he has not only been, as Professor Enns also put it himself, that he is not only an expert on semiconductor devices, that he's so eager to pass on that knowledge. He's also, he treats you like a friend. That's why I gave him this title. It's like a friend, philosopher, guide. Obi-Wan, my own Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think I cannot put it in words. But thanks a lot for all the time that you have spent with me, not only in work, but also motivating me during the days when I was Then, one of thanks also go to Professor Gami's Lord of Monte Carlo Simulations and Professor Carlos San Pedro, both from University of Granada. But for their efforts in developing their Monte Carlo simulators and their openness to share all the simulation data with us without asking back for anything, this PhD could possibly not have seen all the results that it has seen. So my thanks goes to them as well. I interacted with them a lot also during these years. They've provided me feedback on my work and my papers, so a lot of credit for this work goes to them too. I must also thank Professor Neeta Pandey. She was the first professor in India during my bachelor days who introduced me to semiconductors, to analog circuits, and who motivated me. I think this is a dream that I shared with her, that I would one day achieve a PhD. I would get a PhD from an institution abroad. Today, I think part of that dream has been realized. So thank you, ma'am, if you're watching. Professor Basu, she is the head of the electronics department. Surprisingly, it has been 6 years, no, it has been 8 years that I have graduated from my bachelor's. She has been in constant touch, especially during my PhD days. Every once in a while, I would get a message from her as to how things are progressing at the college and how I am progressing with my studies. This is really motivating. This is what shows that there are people, there are teachers, professors who care about you. So thank you, ma'am, as well. Comes Dr. Vladek Grabinsky. Vladek. He's another mentor that I must thank. We have never worked together on any technical stuff, but we have had lots and lots of discussions over lunch, over coffee while I was here at Lausanne, and also when I do visit here. He has such an enthusiasm about everything that is technology and everything that is not technology. Like he's enthusiastic about everything in the world. And he has kind of ended up rubbing that kind of an enthusiasm also to me. So anytime I discuss with him something, a news report that appeared somewhere, and you discuss with him, and at the end of the day, you are feeling so happy to have learned something new. Not only that, with him, I had the opportunity to establish the IEEE student branch here at EPFL, but for his encouragement. He has a bad habit, so don't hide your LinkedIn profiles from him just in case. But he has a bad habit of going and checking everyone's LinkedIn profile. He meets a person and he checks his LinkedIn profile. And unfortunately, I had it listed that I had once established an IEEE student branch somewhere in India, at my college in India. He just got onto that and motivated me that why don't we do the same? The result is that we have the most active IEEE student branch in Switzerland here at EPFL. So thank you, Vladek, for all the time, all the discussions, and all the mentorship that you've provided all these years. Then I must thank my seniors, Antonius, Aravind, Vishwan. On countless occasions, I've known them gone back to them to ask questions, whether technical, non-technical, anything related to life, work, or anything else. They have been also guiding me throughout all these years. The word guardian angels gets thrown around at EPFL quite a lot, especially in the electricity department. But if you want to know, if you want to really see what guardian angels look like, you don't have to see any farther than these two people, the aumôniers at EPFL, Maria Zufre and Christian Bay. Well, Maria, unfortunately, is not any longer the aumônier at EPFL. But this is what guardian angels look like. You go to them with a face like this, and you will not exit their office feeling all exuberant and happy with a face like this. I must really thank my colleague Mariana. She knows a lot more about transistors than I do. That's for sure. I've learned a lot from her as well. We have shared our offices back here when I was in Lausanne as well as in Neuchâtel. And we share our train journeys as well many times now back and forth between Lausanne and Neuchâtel. And we have had countless discussions on all plethora of topics. She's a wonderful person. And I must really thank her now for being such a wonderful person who I have the pleasure of sharing my office with. Lucian Bardin, Farzan Jazeli, Omid, Josie Luis, all the colleagues I had at EPFL. There have been countless moments, small and big, over lunch, over coffee, countless moments spent with these guys, which have made this quasi-ballistic journey a little bit more easy, a little bit more ballistic. With Lucian especially, it has also been a pleasure to work on the IEEE student branch, something that I started. It's what he has taken forward to the heights that it sees today. Thanks to all of these colleagues. And I must thank also my colleagues from ICELA, Raghav, Jeremy, Manson, Vladimir, Raiki, Claudio. Again, once you have such interesting colleagues to talk with, you arrive in the morning, you go for a coffee, you go for lunch together. Fortunately, I don't work a lot with these guys, but everything else that I do with them makes such a pleasure to take this trip to Neuchâtel every day and it makes me feel motivated to go and see these guys. Thanks a lot to all of you for being such nice colleagues. This guy, Francois, he was, he did a 6 months exchange with us in our group. He was also a co-author on my first paper in which he actually tested one of the models. He validated that model, which led us to make that publication. But that's not what I'm thanking him about. I know he's seeing it via YouTube. I'm thanking him for, he tried to teach me swimming via Facebook and failed miserably. You will not succeed to teach me swimming. Then I must thank all the secretaries, Mariam, Isabel, Catherine, the secretary of our lab. Most of the people here have developed with only one secretary in the lab. I've had the pleasure of asking for services from so many secretaries, and all of them have applied with a big smile on their face. What a lucky person I should be. I must thank all of those people. And my friends, Moritz and Luciana, Elsa Floriano, Anna Conal. I know these guys practically from the few months that I'm here at Lausanne. To Moritz, I owe many firsts in my life. My first beer, the first time I went out. But the most interesting, the first time I went on a hiking trip. Imagine, the first time ever I hiked on a mountain, he takes me to the Grand Verron, which is just a little bit below mountaineering. It's level T5. This is an interesting guy, but ever since I've fallen in love with Swiss mountains, and it's thanks to him that I go hiking every Sunday mountains. Any friends that I have outside EPFL, I should thank Elsa for them. And any one of you looking for friends, just go and network with her. You will end up having a big social circle. Now, if you are in the need of doing any random philosophical discussion on yoga or on any other philosophical topic, just call her up, ask her out for a coffee or lunch, and you'll end up having your discussion. Another guy, Ramon, he is also no longer at UPFL, he's doing good in his life now. But there was one guy who was perhaps the guy who I would always go about and have discussions on anything and everything about India and everything else about an Indian in Switzerland. One of the nicest persons I know in my life. Then my flatmates, Hauke, my ex-flatmate Christel and Kaho. When you share a flat with someone, it's when you realize that how important your flatmates are also for your work. You have to be really living in such a nice environment. You have to be living with very nice people to be able to concentrate only on your work during the work time and come back home or on the weekends and the evenings and have a very nice chat and discussion with them and feel happy about it. So thanks to my flatmates that I could succeed. Elisa, I think this meeting her has been one of the most fantastic things that has happened to me during these years. I've been feeling very down. It's a phase in PhD, you go down and you go up. She spent countless hours in person and via Skype. I should also thank Skype for that. Where she has been the motivating factor. She has always been pushing me to go forward and try to achieve what I want to achieve. Thanks a lot for being such a nice companion. It's ironic how the family, even though it's the most important part of your life, always appears at the end of any acknowledgements. I must thank my sister, who has always been very encouraging, writing me little messages during the chat. But especially my parents, from whom I learned how to read, write, and talk. Anything, the basic ingredients that require that are required for such a PhD. It's to them that I dedicate this thesis. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
And they stick it or they're wrapping garbage from pollution and financial.
Before opening anything, the food here, we have to see something else. Let's check it. Can I please?
I must especially also thank Lucian and Farzan for helping me with the organization of the day today. Setting up the table. Lucian, due to Lucian that you'll be eating some food. I've organized for an Indian dinner, but he's the one who fetched it from the restaurant. Had it not been for him, we would be eating. So I really actually brought the food.
Let's go. It takes some time.
Anurag, I would not thank them before looking at what they prepared for you.
So, okay, I'll try to be as short as possible. And, I know the food will not be warm anymore, so it's better to keep it short. So we have seen that Anurag is a very awesome guy in terms of research, in terms of academic results. Let's see a little bit if he has done anything else during these years. So yeah, let's see some other titles and jobs that he was dealing with during this last years. So yeah, as you could see, he's a passionate speaker. He's very good on that. He could teach classes and classes on oratory and speaking. But apart from that, he's doing some other kind of modeling, and specifically his fashion modeling. This especially was a kind of joke that we were doing at the very beginning of the PhD. He is actually doing modeling, but when he would talk with girls, he would not mention what kind of modeling, so that they would understand that it's this kind of modeling. And in fact, he's dealing with it pretty well. So it's not math, just modeling. What else? Well, from time to time, he can be official testers. For example, here he was checking the mine depth somewhere in Poland, his secret mission. You can see it is indeed very deep, this mine. No comment, there is no need. He is testing the salt to see because you probably know that he had a lot of problems when he arrived here in Europe with the taste. He was not able to decide whether a certain food was tasty or not. So he got trained and look, this is him in action. What else? Well, he can be official guide for giving any tricks. For example, here in Gliwice in Poland, everybody seemed to know where we are going to go and things like that. And he's the only one that is really into it. Not only that, look these guys. I mean, they pretend to, okay, let's see where we go. No, but he's really into it. Okay. Some other activities. Well, he can be the official photographer. For example, here he is trying to take pictures of some pigeons, maybe. Here he's trying to get the main scene, which in theory is supposed to be somewhere there, but anyway. Here, what do you see? Of course, you see these three bunch of guys having fun. But look, there's something else. Pictures. Okay. Okay, you see Farzan here, trying to get to arrive in the water. But look, Anurag is there again to do the official guy to get some more information.
The lost electron, right?
And in some other times, he's such a motivated card game. You can see it actually on this page. There's no more need to say anything. And yeah, this is it. This is a little bit of what he's doing. Side activities. And there is something more. Today he got a phone call from some officials in the IEEE, and we will see this phone call. Now, unfortunately, we didn't make it to run it in the same time, so I will count on your RAM, on your memory, to memorize the first and then to see the other one. Actually, yes. Okay. Do not sort. It's the first time I'm inserting any video in a presentation, so please pardon me for that. Wait, just another thing. There is no sound here. There is? Sorry for that. Okay. So let's hear first. Sorry?
Make it increasing a little.
Yeah.
This side, on the right hand side.
Okay, yeah. This is not connected. Could you help me? I don't know, maybe I'm not doing it properly. Sorry for that. Sorry guys, unless we have a technical here.
Okay, you heard the thing. It was working. No?
Just cover your ears for a second.
Hi, Anurag. This is Pushpa Jain. I'm calling from the. Hello, can you hear me, Anurag? Okay, cool. That's good. Okay, so this is Pushpa Jain, and I'm calling from the Electronic Device Society, New York. And we're calling in connection with your paper, which is titled Modeling the Channel Charge and Potential in Quasi.
Sorry. But I need to do that because I don't see this.
Hello, this is Mr. Anurag Mangla. Hi, Anurag. This is Pushpa Jain. I'm calling from the. Hello, can you hear me, Anurag? Okay, cool. Let's go. Okay, so this is Pushpa Jain, and I'm calling from the Electronic Device Society, New York. And we're calling in connection with your paper, which is titled Modeling the Channel Charge and Potential in Quasi-Ballistic Nanoscale Double-Gate MOSFETs, that you submitted very recently. And we would like to tell you, inform you that we've been one of the top, among the top 20 people who come up first, and you're entitled to receive the Best Young Scientist Award tonight. And we, in this connection, we'll be making a press announcement today, which is probably, I'm guessing it's evening right now in Switzerland, where you are. No, not really. I mean, this is true. Okay, I don't know why you're thinking this is a joke, but I'm just going anyway. So, we just like a short description of yourself because I don't think we would deserve to have this thing that you have about yourself with the PhD, where you studied, which is already on your paper. So, would you like to tell us something more than that? Well, we've already seen that, but we're actually looking for something which is more what you would like to say about yourself, because, I mean, we know that we already have a description on your paper, but we want something more. Could you tell us about your non-technical activities, for example, of how, you know, people would be interested in how you are, how you spend your time other than being a scientist, so.
That is, yeah.
It's not about all the information. It's it will be online soon today. We're just making a press announcement in a couple of hours. I mean, by the time I guess it's midday here, we'll be able to do it. So you'll have to trust us in this. I don't know why you don't have reason to believe. I think it's common for scientists to really question everything, but trust me on this. I'm not really into the science thing. I'm just the secretary managing all of this, so you gotta trust me on this. Yeah, sure, we can do that, but we're actually running short on time. We just have a few more hours to wrap up our program, so please say something would be good. Okay, well, okay, if you decline your minutes of fame, then sorry about that, but we'll catch you on email then. Thanks, bye-bye, have a nice day. What? You got that, it's a joke. Yeah, yes.
This is the part that I really don't know. I really don't.
This is some type of joke.
So fast. See that he was
what I can do is maybe I can direct you to my profile and just contact and create the web page. And I still have everything to direct that it's to get sensitive information. I will just direct you to go to people.pdfm.ch/Anurag Mangla. I should already say that I cannot really notify you guys that I should go to your information.
You're actually having fun on our account.
And we have this coming there if you want to check 300 meters away from it's very step by and have a chat.
Did you get what he said? So I know you're a few hundred meters away. So why don't you come directly here and let's talk.
Is it possible for you to just send me an email and see what information I'll be very happy to answer. I'm very sorry, I can't deal with the information and I'm happy to
Okay, so I have to tell you now that if you were a little bit more collaborative, we would have offered you $10,000. I'm about to say francs, but anyway, dollars, because we were calling from New York. But just with one condition, that you would spend them together with all your friends and family. Unfortunately, you didn't take the occasion, so no money for you, and you're neither from home.
That's exactly why I love my friends. They're very predictable. I'm an Indian, come from a certain kind of a background which is known to save a lot of money. So I save also a lot of money for my friends. I can do with your $10,000, whatever you want to do. What do you think? You're not going to get me with a joke like that. My paper, which has not even been downloaded yet. Suddenly, on the day of my public defense, IEEE comes up with the idea of giving me Young Scientist Award, which even the electrical department EPFL would never think of doing. You guys are predictable, but I still love you because you guys are so very nice. But you took all the time and effort to do all of that. This is what is touching, really. So thanks a lot. So the presents I see have been wrapped in the copies of my paper. I think from today, this paper is going to become famous now. Now I might see more citations and downloads. Just to print it. So I receive a smart box, 3 jours d'évasion. You should have attached a little message for Professor Renz with that. He needs to give me these 3 days of grace. But thanks a lot. Thank you very much. You guys are very kind. A copy of my second paper. In fact, this was the first paper that I published during the PhD. Nice to see destroying my own. And I received an Arduino robot. Wow! Thank you very much. I've really been touched by this gesture, which I think also goes on to show that you guys really understand. You really understand me as a friend. Yet you know what I had in my mind. Thank you. So now it's time for on the dinner. I have organized for the dinner. It tastes good. As you have realized, I don't have really a good sense of taste, so you are the ones who are going to tell me afterwards. And a message from my caterer: if you like it, just give him a visit as well.